It's been a while since I've had this much fun reviewing a lens. I've done a good number of truly fantastic lenses this year, but this E-mount 135 f1.8 lap from Viltrox is simply one of the most intriguing lenses I've ever come across. It's quirky, but also means serious business when it comes to performance. I thought we've pretty much seen the final form in terms of how you'd interface with a camera lens. But this has shown me how much more tech and features you could possibly integrate into a barrel of glass elements. Most of the intrigue you get when experiencing this Viltrox 135 for the very first time is gonna stem from this full color LCD screen on the top of the barrel. There's a full-on heads-up display happening here, and get this, you can even upload custom images to be displayed on this, but we'll have to circle back to that in a bit, because I need to split talking about this lens into two aspects. We'll start with how this lens performs optically, and I believe this is the very first time I've got to dedicate a segment just to talk about the features on a lens. But most important thing first, the images. The optical quality of this lens is rather stunning. Wide open f1.8 sharpness is excellent in the center, and this is under scrutiny of the 50 megapixel alpha 1. Even at the very extreme edges, it's still sharp enough to resolve fine detail, though on a 135 I find it highly unlikely you'll be framing anything at the edges. Still, chromatic aberrations are well suppressed, though you might find a hint of it if you look really hard. Wide open vignetting is also at remarkably low levels. It's a shockingly tiny difference between wide open and stopped down. But when you do leave this wide open, an f1.8 at 135mm is of course a bokeh monster. And it's not just about quantity on this Viltrox, the quality of the bokeh is also top notch. This is flagship levels of clean. No visible fringing around the bokeh balls and no onion rings at all. We do get some cat's eye bokeh towards the corners, and it's possible to get absolutely massive bokeh by focusing up close. Minimum focus is 0.72 meters, which for a 135 is actually really close. Close enough to get detail shots or fill the frame with small subjects, since this has got a quarter to life-size magnification, which is actually on par with Sony's 135G Master. And for a retail price of $899, this is asking for less than half of the G Master's price, while delivering image quality which is typical to that price bracket. The Hyper VCM motor in this also delivers autofocus, which is respectably fast. It's quiet, though not completely inaudible, but other than that, nothing much to really complain about when it comes to autofocus. Manual focus is by wire, and although I wish that the response was linear, you do get a very responsive digital distance scale, which pops up only when you engage manual focus. This shows up above the distance readout, which is always visible even when in autofocus mode. In a similar fashion, the iris scale is also digitally animated when you turn the iris ring. One thing about the iris ring though is there's a switch which allows you to declick it, which is great, but when it's in clicky mode, each step of the ring actually modifies the iris by less than a third of a stop. If you're used to Sony lenses, then each click will always correspond to a third of a stop. On this, it's a bit different. The readout on your camera screen will always round off the F number to the nearest third stop, but as you're clicking the aperture ring between these third stop markings, the 11-bladed aperture is actually responding to those tiny increments. In a sense, this gives you a lot more granularity in terms of exposure control, but if you ever want to go back to doing third stop increments, it is possible by going all the way to the end of the scale to engage the A position, which neatly tucks away the aperture scale and lets you control aperture from your camera's dials. Now, the whole thing with the screen may come across as a bit unnecessary or even gimmicky, but I actually am really genuinely enjoying it as a status monitor. For things like indicating whether the lens is in auto or manual focus mode, yes, there's the physical switch, but do we really bother to look at the side of our lens to check the position of that? Plus, the display has a very distinct appearance between auto and manual focus, because one's missing a whole distance scale. So one glance and you can tell if twisting your lens's focus ring is going to do anything. When it comes to the focus limiter as well, you get a pop-up only when the focus limiter is engaged with the range of it indicated. So this screen on the lens is a luxury I really don't mind living with. But if we're talking about quality of life features on this, Viltrox has really pushed some boundaries. I noticed a USB-C port on the back of the lens and thought that must be for firmware updates. But turns out I was only half correct. You actually update the firmware of this lens wirelessly using the Viltrox lens app. It completely blew my mind that this lens has Bluetooth. When you do actually use the app to update the lens's firmware, I would very much recommend powering the lens via the USB-C port instead of the camera body, because the last thing you want is the camera shutting down and cutting power to the lens in the middle of a firmware update. But it's also through the Viltrox lens app where you can really customize your lens. This 135mm has 2 function buttons on its barrel, and they can each be assigned to do different things. If you select the option called mapping, then it would simply follow what you've assigned the focus hold button to do in your Sony camera settings. By default, so that's, well, focus hold. But in the Viltrox lens app, you can individually assign functions to each of the 2 buttons to do things you won't be able to set up from your camera's menu. Functions like toggling the lens's screen on and off, as well as jogging the focus to or between user-defined points. These points are defined at the current focus distance by holding down the function button, and you even get a little marker on the distance scale. It's actually quite neat for doing perfectly accurate and repeatable focus racks, though I think if there were options for customizing the speed of the focus rack, that would really make this super useful. The ultimate customization enabled by the app, though, has to be the boot up animation. This can either be a line of text or a full color photo. And the pixel density is not bad, by the way. From the app, you would choose a photo from your phone to crop, then subsequently upload to the lens. You can also set a duration for how long it stays on screen at every boot. If you go with the text option, that's also fully customizable as well. As bizarre and extra as this may seem, it's arguably the most graceful way to identify your lens, just in case someone else around you also owns the Viltrox 135 Lab. Other than that, I won't really say no to being reminded of my cat while I'm out on a shoot, or if someone borrows my lens, it's a nice reminder of who they're borrowing from. It's unusual, but I would say with certainty that the ownership experience is enhanced thanks to this fun little feature. This is one of the more premium priced lenses from Viltrox, but when we put this into perspective, $899 really is a steal for the tier this lens is cutting into. There's practically nothing to fault about it optically, and hardware-wise, it comes with more bells and whistles than any other lens I've seen. Even little touches, like the lens hood comes with a rubberized tip and a very felt-lined interior. It's a tad on the bigger side, weighing in at a bit over 1.2 kilograms, but size-wise, an 82mm front filter thread is pretty much standard for just about every other 135 f1.8 out there. The Viltrox AF 135mm f1.8 Lab is truly a pleasant surprise for me. It's an extremely well-built lens with excellent image quality at a very modest price point. I'll be leaving links below for anyone interested, and I'll be seeing you around.